Hey guys, tonight we wander into the hidden arteries of ancient trade, where deserts smell of dust and spices, rivers shimmer with secrets, and every step you take might brush against a deal that would make your modern ethics curl in shock. You probably won't survive this unscathed, mentally at least, but that's half the thrill. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious who's tuning in while the sun sets or rises. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a narrow caravan path that has been worn smooth by centuries of wheels and hooves, the scent of dried grass mingling with hints of cinnamon, saffron, and something darker you can't quite place. Merchants have whispered about these routes for generations, calling them the veins of commerce, but you see them for what they are: shadows sliding across the earth, carrying goods that are often illegal, sometimes lethal, and always deeply secret. Historians still argue whether certain inland paths were primarily for spices or slaves, but from your vantage, it doesn't matter. Both move in tandem, like two sides of a coin that no one wants to flip in public. Every bend of the river, every ridge of sand conceals potential ambushes or bribes. You imagine a camel train winding slowly across the horizon, its burdens hidden beneath layers of woven cloth and whispered codes. Fringe accounts suggest some caravans carried not only goods, but also letters between lovers in distant cities, or even clandestine treaties, tiny paper conspiracies slipping unnoticed between bundles of sugar, salt, and opium. You feel the tension as your eyes scan the sun-scorched landscape, noting that one false step or misread sign could derail fortunes or lives. Markets, when you finally reach them, aren't just places to exchange silver for silk. They're theaters of deception. You watch as traders nod at one another, subtle gestures indicating contraband hidden in barrels labeled figs or oil. Scholars debate whether the fig barrels ever actually contained figs, or if the label itself was just an elaborate ruse, a question you ponder while dodging the occasional donkey kick. There's something almost absurd about the precision of this chaos, like an ancient board game played with human stakes and fragrant spices. At night, the routes grow eerily silent, broken only by the distant call of nocturnal animals and the soft crunch of sand underfoot. You might stumble across a fire ring where a lone trader counts coins and murmurs names: slaves, merchants, mysterious buyers whose wealth glimmers like gold in the flickering light. Some fringe stories say certain fires were burned to hide human traces, a practice no one admits in polite conversation, but whispers about in taverns near ports. You shiver, partly from the chill creeping into the desert, partly from the realization that survival here depends on understanding the invisible rules. Imagine, for a moment, that a single vial of opium or a carved ivory figurine could determine the next week's travel, the next city's alliances, or the next caravan's route. Traders carry ledgers hidden under rugs, weighted down to avoid prying eyes, and sometimes entire towns participate unknowingly in this network, accepting goods without questioning the human cost behind them. It's a delicate balance. Misjudge a bribe, a handshake, or a coded mark, and your journey in life could collapse like a poorly built bridge over the Tigris. You press on past ruined watchtowers and faded banners, remnants of empires that once boasted about their wealth but quietly relied on these very shadow routes. Here, the air smells faintly of smoke and history, of leather and resin, and if you listen closely, you might catch the whisper of an old sailor's rhyme about a lost caravan swallowed by the dunes. Fringe accounts claim some routes were haunted by spirits of slaves or lost traders, a claim you can neither confirm nor fully dismiss, leaving you with a prickling sense of both awe and dread. As dawn approaches, You reach a plateau that gives you a sweeping view of the network stretching in all directions. Rivers branch like veins, roads carve through hills, and distant cities glimmer with the promise of markets and secrets. You pause, inhaling the cool, sharp air, realizing that this vast, complex lattice of trade is more than just movement of goods. It's a choreography of survival, deception, and human ambition. Historians still argue whether any empire could truly control these veins, or if they existed above the reach of kings and governors, obeying only the code of the traders themselves. And while you take a moment to rest, imagine the goods themselves: golden ingots, powdered spices, bundles of textiles, and yes, the human cargo whose presence was sometimes so normalized it barely registered. Fringe studies suggest some merchants treated enslaved people as currency units, trading them with the same detached calculation as sacks of grain, which is a sobering thought to carry along with the sweet smell of nutmeg in the wind. You adjust your pack and continue forward, the horizon ahead promising another day of dusty roads, hidden exchanges, and whispered secrets that will make your modern comforts feel almost absurdly naive. By the time you reach the next oasis, you've internalized the rhythm of this hidden world. The silent codes, the subtle glances, the layered bundles, and the faint, almost imperceptible pulse of fear and hope. Every caravan has its stories, some recorded in merchants' diaries, others lost to memory. You realize you are part observer, part participant, and entirely captivated. As the sun rises fully, the shadows you walk through slowly dissolve, but the sense of a network so vast and intertwined that it seems almost alive lingers in your mind. Remember that caravan leader you glimpsed yesterday, counting coins by firelight. You now understand the delicate calculus of trade. A single mistake, a misread gesture, or even trusting the wrong muleteer could ripple across continents. And yet there's a rhythm to it, a strange poetry hidden among dust, spice, and whispered bargains. You trudge onward, heart racing, imagining the countless paths converging ahead, each carrying lives, dreams, and secrets in equal measure. You follow the faint trail of smoke rising over the dunes, your eyes tracing the route of traders who thrive in the gaps between empires, invisible to tax collectors and customs officers alike. Merchants of shadows, they call themselves, or at least that's how modern historians like to romanticize them. But you sense the truth is far less glamorous. You walk among their stories, hearing the clink of coins, the murmurs of deals made in alleyways, and the occasional laughter that seems oddly out of place in such a morally ambiguous world. Historians still argue whether some of these traders were purely opportunists, or if they were bound by a code that kept their enterprises functional and minimally murderous. Either way, you realize that in this shadow economy, subtlety is a weapon sharper than any blade. You imagine a trader leaning against a caravan wheel, his face half hidden beneath a turban, counting a mix of gold coins, precious stones, and secret letters that might spark wars or end lives. Fringe accounts suggest some of these traders kept journals not of sales, but of the whispers and rumors that traveled faster than the goods themselves. It's almost comical how important gossip could be. A single overheard conversation might redirect a whole shipment of silks or spices, and you can't help but smirk at the idea of your modern-day network alerts being replaced by camel riders carrying intelligence. By day, these merchants are almost invisible. They dress like ordinary townsfolk or fishermen, but their eyes are constantly scanning, calculating risk, assessing opportunity. You feel the pull of their constant vigilance, a tension in your shoulders you didn't notice at first. Ports, markets, even roadside inns become stages where these shadow players perform their quiet, precise dance of commerce. They bribe officials with ease, slip coded messages into plain sight, and sometimes disappear entirely for weeks, leaving only rumors and debts behind. Fringe stories claim that some merchants literally carried entire vaults sewn into their garments, which makes you wonder if fashion ever really served style, or just survival. And yet, for all their secrecy, these traders shaped empires. One slip in a deal could start a rebellion, alter the flow of a city's food supply, or even dictate which side won a battle. Historians still argue whether certain shadow merchants ever amassed enough influence to rival kings, and you can't help but imagine a man in a simple tunic, sitting cross-legged on a mat, laughing at the very idea that a crowned monarch could command the world while he controlled its hidden veins. There's a sensory layer here you don't want to miss. The tang of salt from a nearby river mixes with the earthy aroma of camels, with hints of smoke from distant fires, and occasionally the sweet, dizzying scent of saffron or frankincense. You trudge through it all, imagining the invisible hands, merchants of shadows, steering entire economies with just a whisper and a gesture. Fringe accounts suggest some traders even carried small birds trained to carry coded messages between cities, which honestly seems like something out of a bedtime story. But then again, so does the idea of entire empires relying on secret networks to survive. As night falls, these merchants vanish into inns and hidden courtyards, negotiating in silence while the city sleeps. You peek through an open window and see one scribbling symbols into a ledger, his hand moving so quickly it seems almost hypnotic. Historians still debate whether these symbols were purely accounting tools or a coded language that only other traders could decipher. Either way, it leaves you feeling like you've stumbled into a secret society where every action is calculated, every word measured, and every breath carries potential profit or peril. By the time you're forced to rest, you realize that observing these shadowy figures is a lesson in patience, perception, and pattern recognition. Their lives are full of tension, humor, and unpredictability, a mixture that somehow feels like the heartbeat of the ancient world itself. You remember a strange tidbit from a fringe source. Some merchants were rumored to maintain talismans for luck, placing small figurines of mythical creatures in their bags to ensure safe passage and profitable deals. It's a touch of superstition that humanizes them, making their lives slightly less like ghost stories and more like carefully choreographed plays. The next morning, you rise to find the trail of your observations already fading into the sunlit streets of the port city below. You follow the movement of the shadows across cobblestones, hearing the muffled bartering of hidden markets and the creak of wagons loaded with both the mundane and the illicit. You pause, letting the rhythm of the merchants lives imprint itself in your memory. The quiet strategy, the sudden bursts of negotiation, the near-invisible connections linking distant cities. And as you continue, it becomes clear. Understanding the merchants of shadows is less about knowing their names and more about sensing the pulse of a world that thrives in the cracks of history, between law and desire, visibility and secrecy. You trudge along a narrow dirt road, eyes adjusting to the glare of midday sun bouncing off the golden sands, and can't help but notice the contrast of wealth and human suffering coiled into the same caravan. Gold, ivory, and human cargo, the trio that defined ancient trade routes. You watch merchants balancing sacks of powdered spices alongside small cages or crates that rattle ominously, hinting at the human lives contained within. Historians still argue whether the same traders handled both luxury goods and enslaved people with equal detachment, or if different networks specialized, though from where you stand, it all feels chillingly intertwined. Imagine the sheer variety of what moves along these paths. Ivory tusks polished to a creamy sheen, gold nuggets that catch the light like molten stars, and human beings, often kidnapped or sold by desperate families, transported across deserts and rivers, their futures negotiated like bundles of silks. Fringe sources suggest some traders carved intricate symbols into ivory tusks to mark origin or value, a secret code readable only by other merchants. You squint at the horizon, trying to trace the trails of such coded commerce, and feel the tension of history pressing against your senses. Wealth and oppression, beauty and brutality, bundled together in a dusty caravan. You trudge past a merchant measuring gold dust in tiny balanced scales, the metal glinting in the sun, and wonder about the lives that enabled such riches. Some fringe accounts claim that traders kept human tally sticks, wooden pieces marked to track the enslaved people in their care, a bizarrely mechanical approach to human existence. It's a reminder that ancient commerce was simultaneously innovative and deeply dehumanizing. You catch the faint scent of musk from an animal hide, blended with the earthy aroma of unwashed travelers, and feel the uneasy intimacy of proximity to such commerce, both tangible and morally uncomfortable. In coastal markets, you see the same dynamic reflected in port cities, where gold and ivory are weighed and repackaged for overseas trade. Ships lie at anchor, their hulls hiding both luxury goods and people destined for faraway lands. Historians still debate the proportion of wealth derived directly from human trafficking versus that from ivory and other exotic commodities, but the overlap is undeniable. You notice a clerk stamping papers with an official seal, all the while ignoring the crates labeled human cargo, a cognitive dissonance that makes your modern ethics blink in disbelief. You wander through narrow alleyways where barter occurs beneath the shadow of fortified walls. Ivory bracelets, gold rings, and tiny figurines are exchanged alongside whispered sales of people, often cloaked in euphemisms. Labor units, household assistants, temporary retainers. Fringe accounts hint that in some societies, these euphemisms were deliberate psychological shields, allowing communities to normalize morally uncomfortable trade. You feel the tension of their world, the line between commerce and morality so thin it might vanish under a sudden gust of desert wind. Imagine the journey of a single human cargo crate, loaded onto a mule, traversing rocky passes and river crossings, passing through multiple hands, each adding their fee, each negotiating for profit. It's almost cinematic, the meticulous choreography of profit over empathy. But of course, no one in that scene pauses to consider the human cost beyond potential damage to merchandise. Fringe narratives suggest that some traders even used scented oils to mask the human presence in crates, a small yet eerie detail that underscores how normalized this system had become. At night, the campfires flicker against the desert darkness, and you observe traders huddled together, whispering over maps and ledgers. Gold dust glitters in the firelight, ivory glows faintly, and the humans, still boxed, still counted, shift uncomfortably in the corners. You realize that this triad of commodities, gold, ivory, and human cargo, was the backbone of many ancient economies, driving empires, wars, and wealth accumulation. Historians still argue whether these networks were efficient because of necessity or because greed demanded relentless optimization, but the patterns are undeniable. As dawn breaks, you follow the caravan out of the city, the streets already bustling with port activity. You notice how the public sees only part of the operation, a bustling trade of spices, textiles, and gold, while the shadows conceal the morally fraught exchanges. Fringe sources suggest some merchants had compartments built into wagons to discreetly transport humans alongside legitimate goods, creating a parallel economy invisible to outsiders. You shiver, noting the ingenuity, the audacity, and the quiet cruelty embedded in every transaction. By the time you reach a desert ridge, looking back at the city, you understand how intertwined wealth and human suffering were. Each tusk, each nugget, each crate carries a story of labor, coercion, and negotiation. You trudge onward, absorbing the lesson that the ancient economy was a complex web where beauty and exploitation coexisted, and where profit often outweighed empathy in the blink of a merchant's eye. You catch yourself thinking about the ironic persistence of this system. Centuries later, the luxury goods are celebrated in museums, the gold admired in jewelry, yet the human suffering often erased from the story. Fringe studies suggest some communities developed rituals to commemorate enslaved people in secret, a quiet attempt to acknowledge loss while society continued to profit. You take a deep breath, feeling the weight of this triad pressing on your senses, and understanding that the lines between survival, ambition, and morality are blurrier than you ever imagined. You follow the twisting caravan path as the scent of opium smoke drifts from a distant campfire, mixing with the earthy aroma of crushed herbs and sand. Opium and ancient pharmacies. Here, you realize, the trade in drugs was not a modern invention, but a vital, lucrative part of ancient economies. You watch a merchant grinding poppy pods into a fine powder, preparing it for shipment alongside silks and ivory, and sense the paradox. An empire's strength often rested on substances that numbed both body and conscience. Historians still argue whether governments tacitly encouraged these trades for revenue or tried in vain to regulate them, but the result is clear. Empires and opium were intertwined. As you trudge closer to the camp, you glimpse jars of hashish, bundles of psychoactive herbs, and small pouches filled with hallucinogenic seeds. Fringe accounts claim some traders believed these substances could reveal divine messages or cure ailments, while others treated them purely as commodities. You notice the rhythmic clink of coins being counted in exchange for vials, the faint glow of amber liquid catching the sun. It's hard not to think that the same hands handling human cargo also manage drugs that could alter perception, making you wonder if morality was ever considered in these calculations, or if it simply didn't matter. In bustling market cities, opium and other drugs were as much a part of daily life as bread or wine. Pharmacies, early versions of apothecaries, sold syrups, tinctures, and powders openly, sometimes with elaborate signage and sometimes with coded symbols understood only by experienced patrons. You imagine slipping through the narrow aisles, inhaling the scent of herbs and resins, feeling your pulse quicken as the weight of the trade hits you. Fringe stories suggest some pharmacists secretly double-dealt, blending high-quality opium with cheaper fillers to increase profits, a gamble that could ruin a trader if discovered. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was and whether any governing authorities actively monitored it, but the overlap of legality, secrecy, and profit is unmistakable. You walk past merchants who have specialized in these substances for generations, their fingers stained with powders, their ledgers marked with mysterious codes. Some fringe sources suggest certain traders kept small libraries detailing obscure recipes for psychoactive concoctions, guarded as jealously as any gold cash. You pause to consider that while modern narratives often separate medicine from drug, ancient societies rarely drew a clear line. A single vial could ease pain, induce visions, or fund a war, sometimes all at once. Nightfall brings a quiet intensity to the scene. Fires flicker against mud brick walls, casting shadows over jars and pouches. You notice subtle rituals, a small offering of incense, a whispered prayer, perhaps a talisman tucked under the counter. Fringe tales even claim that some merchants used trained cats or birds to guard particularly valuable batches, an early form of security that blends practicality with superstition. You shiver, imagining the lengths humans have gone to protect the tools of their vice and profit. You move along a canal where smugglers load small boats with opium barrels, concealing them beneath rice sacks and textiles. Historians still argue whether these maritime networks were extensions of the same land-based routes or entirely separate enterprises. The sight is mesmerizing and disquieting, a smooth choreography of concealment, vigilance, and risk. You can almost hear the whispered calculations of profit and danger flowing from one hand to another. And then there's the human element, those who consume these substances. Some fringe accounts hint that opium dens were used not just for pleasure, but as venues for negotiation, espionage, or recruitment, where secrets flowed as freely as smoke. You imagine a room lit dimly by oil lamps, filled with murmured deals, laughter, and the occasional cough or sigh, a hidden theater of power and indulgence. Historians still argue whether these dens were primarily social spaces or covert nodes of political influence, but either way, their role in the trade network is undeniable. As dawn breaks over the caravans, you sense that the ancient drug trade was more than commerce. It was a shaping force. It influenced empires, social behavior, and cross-cultural contact. Fringe research suggests some trade routes existed solely to transport psychoactive substances, creating mini economies within the larger system. You take a deep breath, feeling the mingling sense of herbs, smoke, and dust, and recognize that opium and its kin were not peripheral curiosities. They were central to the machinery of empire, woven into the very arteries you traced in the first sections. By the time the sun climbs high, the traders are moving again, balancing their precious powders alongside gold, ivory, and human cargo. You trudge beside them, aware that every step carries centuries of hidden decisions, ethical compromises, and whispered deals. And while you may never taste the opium, you can almost feel its pull, the subtle power that makes empires bend, merchants prosper, and secrets flow like smoke along the trade routes. You trudge into the heart of a bustling harbor, where the tang of saltwater mixes with tar, spices, and the faint metallic scent of coins. Ports of deception, they call them, places where the gleaming public markets mask shadow economies. Ships creak as crews unload crates of figs, wine, and textiles, while hidden compartments carry the truly lucrative cargo: ivory, gold, opium, and humans. Historians still argue whether certain port officials were complicit out of greed or coercion, but you can feel the tension in the air, thick enough to choke a camel. As you walk along the wooden docks, you notice the subtle cues: a rope tied unusually, a barrel left slightly ajar, a sailor lingering longer than necessary near a cargo hold. Fringe accounts suggest some ports developed an entire system of signaling, knocks on timber, lanterns at odd angles, to indicate contraband's location to those in the know. You can't help but imagine a secret language of creaks, flashes, and gestures, invisible to the casual observer, yet understood by seasoned traders. The scene is a sensory overload. Salt spray hits your cheeks, mixed with the aroma of cinnamon and ginger. Sailors shout in dozens of languages, coins clatter on wooden tables, and you glimpse shadowy figures exchanging small parcels behind barrels. Fringe stories even claim that some traders employed trained monkeys or birds to ferry messages between ships, tiny emissaries of a clandestine communication network. Historians still debate the practicality of such methods, but the images of feathered and furry couriers flitting through port alleyways make you chuckle softly amid the tension. You pass customs officials inspecting goods, though you quickly realize their inspections are more performative than thorough. Bribes, subtle threats, or clever misdirection ensure that contraband slips through. Some fringe accounts suggest that in certain cities, officials received a percentage of illicit goods as part of a formal arrangement, an early bureaucratic corruption model that seems almost laughably efficient. You watch a clerk wink at a merchant, who casually slides a small bag across the table, and you feel a shiver at the seamless choreography of deceit. By night, the port transforms. Lanterns cast warm pools of light, shadows stretch across the quay, and traders slip silently among the crowds. Small boats carry illicit cargo upstream under the cover of darkness, moving like ghosts on water. Fringe sources claim some ports even had secret underwater caches, chambers cut into stone beneath the docks, where precious goods waited for trusted recipients. You imagine wading through these hidden chambers, smelling the damp stone and salt, the faint trace of incense, and the ever-present tension that a single wrong step could expose a centuries-old secret. You pause to consider the human stories behind the cargo. Enslaved individuals, hidden under tarps or in false compartments, glance at the flickering lanterns above, unaware of which side of the transaction will define their future. Fringe narratives suggest that some captives were given minimal rations of opium or wine to pacify them during transport, a grim irony you can't ignore. Historians still argue about the extent of these practices, but the combination of pragmatism and cruelty is painfully clear. Alongside this, luxury goods flow with almost casual ease. Silks, pearls, and spices are traded openly, their value well understood and admired by all. Yet, as you note, these same merchants handle the illicit as effortlessly as the legitimate. Fringe accounts describe elaborate ledger systems where legitimate and illegitimate trades are recorded in the same books, coded with symbols only insiders understand. You feel the dizzying complexity of it all. One misread sign, one false entry, could unravel months of careful planning. By dawn, you stand at the edge of the quay, watching ships depart laden with both visible wealth and hidden human suffering. You sense the rhythm of this world, the ebb and flow of goods, secrets, and silent compacts. You realize that ports are more than entry points. They are stage sets for an elaborate theater where fortune and morality collide. And as you trudge onward, the water lapping softly against hulls, you carry the understanding that every barrel, every crate, every subtle gesture here has consequences far beyond the immediate harbor, rippling through empires, societies, and the shadow networks you've been following since the deserts. You trudge behind a line of camels, their hooves thudding against the packed earth, the sun low and burning your shoulders, as the caravan snakes through rocky passes and sparse desert vegetation. Caravans and kidnappings. These are twin realities that define the trade routes you're now following. Every cargo wagon carries more than gold or spices. It carries the potential for danger, coercion, and the human lives bound within crude cages or under tarps. Historians still argue whether most captives were abducted by professional raiders or sold by impoverished families. But either way, the routes themselves are corridors of vulnerability. You catch a faint scent of sweat, sand, and resin as you approach the encampment, and a low murmur of bargaining drifts on the wind. Traders pace beside their mounts, inspecting bundles and murmuring to one another in coded language. Fringe accounts suggest some caravans carried not only humans and luxury goods, but also rare poisons or aphrodisiacs used in faraway courts. A bizarre side hustle that could fund an entire month of travel if the market was favorable. You can't help but feel the tension under your skin, a constant awareness that one misstep or delay could turn this caravan into a scene of chaos. Night descends quickly in the desert, and with it comes the quiet ritual of securing the caravan. Humans are moved into smaller tents, their movements restricted to avoid escape, while guards check each pack for contraband or valuables. Fringe sources claim that some traders used clever mechanical devices, simple yet effective, to secure cages and crates, almost like proto-locks. Historians still debate whether these methods were widespread or isolated innovations, but the ingenuity and the ethical darkness behind it is undeniable. You notice the small gestures of traders, a hand brushing a palm across a symbol carved on a camel's saddle, a whispered command, a lantern held just so. These are subtle markers for friends or rivals, a visual Morse code passed along the caravan. Fringe stories even suggest that some caravans employed musicians or storytellers whose primary role was to distract guards or mislead spies. An ingenious, if morally ambiguous, tactic. You chuckle softly at the thought of a bard being a covert agent, his lute strumming under the desert stars while fortunes shift silently around him. As the caravan moves along riverbanks, you sense the double danger, natural hazards and human threat. Bandits and rival merchants lurk in narrow passes, ready to intercept goods or seize captives. Fringe accounts tell of phantom raids, sudden attacks where attackers vanished as mysteriously as they appeared, leaving only rumors behind. Historians still argue whether these stories were embellished to intimidate competitors or based on real, highly coordinated ambushes. You keep a mental note of every ridge and bend, every tree and boulder that could hide a threat. By mid-morning, you glimpse a small settlement where captives are temporarily housed before onward transport. You notice the muted routine, food distribution, inspection, and movement in precise, almost mechanical fashion. Fringe sources suggest some traders even provided basic literacy or vocational training to captives, perhaps to increase their market value, a disconcerting mixture of pragmatism and inhumanity. Historians still debate the extent and sincerity of these practices, but the evidence points to a grim calculus. A human life is a commodity, and its utility can be optimized. Despite the harshness, there is a rhythm to this life. Merchants, guards, captives, animals, and goods all moving in a complex dance dictated by seasons, terrain, and market demand. You follow the lead camel, imagining the countless hours of observation and experience required to orchestrate such a caravan. Fringe anecdotes claim some traders use trained birds to scout ahead, signaling safe paths or potential ambushes, a detail that borders on the fantastical yet fits the ingenuity of these shadow networks. As dusk approaches, you feel the desert cool against your skin. The caravan halts by a dry wadi, and a faint breeze carries the scent of distant fires. Traders settle into their nightly routines and the captives huddle, weary and silent. You realize that these long journeys were as much psychological warfare as physical endurance, teaching both captives and traders about patience, compliance, and vigilance. Historians still argue whether the cruelty was an economic necessity or a reflection of systemic dehumanization, but the impact on every individual is tangible. And while you rest under a blanket of stars, the caravan stretching into darkness, you can almost hear the echoes of footsteps, the whispers of deals, the soft rattle of coins, and the muted cries of those caught in transit. You sense that this duality, commerce and coercion, defines the pulse of the ancient trade, a rhythm you're learning to follow with cautious respect and uneasy fascination. You trudge through a narrow canyon where shadows stretch long under the late afternoon sun, and suddenly, the world of trade feels less tangible and more coded. Codes and secret languages. Every gesture, mark, and word here carries meaning far beyond its surface. Traders have developed entire systems of communication to conceal deals, evade authorities, and coordinate movement across vast distances. Historians still argue whether these codes were standardized across regions or entirely ad hoc, but as you watch a merchant tap a pattern on a crate, you realize the sophistication is undeniable. Fringe accounts suggest that some symbols were carved into camel harnesses or stamped into barrels, a secret lexicon of arrows, dots, and curves that could indicate origin, quality, or urgency. You squint at a crude set of etchings on a wooden post and feel a thrill at deciphering what you can. A shipment of ivory, a warning of bandits ahead, and a note that human cargo is present. The subtlety of it all makes you pause. One misinterpretation could cost a caravan weeks of delay or spark deadly confrontations. You trudge past traders whispering in low tones, their eyes scanning the canyon walls. Certain phrases, innocuous to outsiders, signal agreements, debts, or warnings. Fringe accounts even hint that some of these codes were taught orally to apprentices before they ever handled real goods, a form of initiation into the shadowy community. Historians still debate how widespread these practices were, but you can sense that mastery of language, literal and symbolic, was a form of power as vital as gold or opium. As the sun dips lower, you notice subtle gestures. A merchant tapping his foot in rhythm, a cloth tied around a bag, a flick of a hand toward the horizon. Each is a component of a secret communication system, a way to manage the movement of commodities, information, and people without alerting the uninitiated. Fringe sources claim that some traders even trained animals to recognize signals, delivering messages with a combination of instinct and conditioning. You can't help but grin at the ingenuity, part military strategy, part theater, and entirely human. Nightfall brings lanterns into play, casting patterned shadows on crates and tents. Traders use light itself as code, flashing signals across distances invisible to casual observers. Fringe stories suggest that in some ports, lanterns indicated not only the type of goods, but also their urgency or the presence of an interested buyer nearby. You imagine the careful choreography, the mental gymnastics required to translate light, movement, and gesture into actionable information, and you realize that miscommunication could be as disastrous as bandits or storms. In the desert, markings on rocks and posts serve as cryptic maps. Some fringe accounts claim that certain symbols were deliberately misleading, designed to confuse rival caravans or potential thieves. Historians still argue whether these deceptive markings were widespread strategy or isolated ingenuity, but you notice how effective such a system could be. A single misread symbol and you're led astray for days, consuming precious resources. You pause to trace one symbol with your finger, imagining the silent tension of a trader watching you from a hidden ridge. You notice that even in markets, secret languages persist. A gesture behind a counter, a phrase spoken lightly, or a pattern of coin placement can indicate contraband, safe passage, or a meeting point. Fringe sources suggest that apprentices were tested on these subtle cues before being trusted with high-value goods. The learning curve is steep, and you feel a mix of admiration and relief that you're merely observing, not responsible for the success of a caravan. The air carries scents that serve as codes too, fragrant resins or smoke signals that indicate what's hidden in a shipment. Fringe accounts hint that some traders use this as both camouflage and advertisement. The smell of cinnamon could mask opium, or a faint perfume could signal a high-quality luxury item. Historians still debate whether these olfactory signals were deliberate or coincidental, but you can't ignore the ingenuity behind blending sensory perception with commerce. As you rest beneath a starlit sky, you reflect on the mastery of these secret languages. The codes, gestures, and subtle signs are more than convenience. They are lifelines, ensuring that trade continues under scrutiny, through deserts, across rivers, and into cities where authorities, bandits, and rival merchants lurk. You feel a quiet awe for the complexity and a shiver at the moral ambiguity embedded in this brilliance. Every movement, mark, or word in this hidden network carries a weight you're just beginning to comprehend. You trudge into a bustling market square where the air is thick with dust, spices, and the murmur of countless conversations, and the stark reality of slave markets and social hierarchies hits you like a sudden gust of wind. Here, human lives are weighed alongside gold and ivory, their value debated openly yet quietly accepted by the society that depends on the system. Historians still argue whether the public acceptance of slavery in certain cities was economic pragmatism or cultural normalization, but the rituals and routines you witness make it clear that it is a cornerstone of commerce. You wander past rows of stalls where merchants examine their human cargo with the same scrutiny as any other commodity. Fringe accounts suggest that buyers once tested the skills or health of enslaved individuals using elaborate, almost theatrical demonstrations, a display of dexterity, strength, or intelligence, to justify pricing. The air is pungent with the combination of sweat, leather, and fear. Yet amidst it all, there is a strange rhythm, a dance of negotiation and observation that has endured for centuries. The social hierarchies of the market are as intricate as the trade routes themselves. Certain traders are revered for their expertise. Some buyers command influence based on wealth or lineage, and the enslaved occupy the lowest tier, often voiceless in the process. Fringe sources claim that in some cities, children born into slavery could be traded or apprenticed with varying degrees of social mobility, a chilling reminder of the system's flexibility and moral ambiguity. Historians still debate whether these practices were consistent across regions or unique to specific cultures, but the overall pattern of hierarchy is undeniable. As you navigate the market, you notice subtle markers of status. Clothing, jewelry, and even the way a person stands can indicate whether they are a merchant, a buyer, or property. Fringe accounts suggest some markets had secret inspector roles, individuals who ensured that transactions complied with unwritten social codes and could resolve disputes discreetly. You feel the weight of observation everywhere. Every glance and gesture carries information, and every action is a potential pivot point in the delicate equilibrium of power. You pause by a stall where a young woman demonstrates weaving skills, her fingers deftly creating intricate patterns under the watchful eye of a potential buyer. Fringe sources claim that some enslaved people were trained in exotic crafts, specifically to increase market value, turning human skill into yet another tradable commodity. Historians still argue whether this training was primarily for economic efficiency or social control, but watching the interaction, you see both motives in play. Utility and hierarchy intertwined seamlessly. The market operates with both overt and covert rituals. Public auctions are structured performances, with pricing, gestures, and verbal cues all meticulously choreographed. Fringe accounts even describe silent auctions, where a nod or glance could indicate agreement between traders, bypassing spoken language entirely. You realize that understanding these social hierarchies is as crucial as understanding the goods themselves. A misread gesture could result in lost opportunity, or worse, social censure. Even the layout of the market speaks volumes. High-value goods occupy prominent positions, while human cargo is often segregated, sometimes obscured behind screens or curtains. Fringe stories suggest this spatial organization served dual purposes, maintaining appearances for outsiders while facilitating covert transactions. Historians still debate whether this separation reflected concern for morality, logistics, or a mix of both, but the spatial dynamics reinforce the power structure in plain sight. At dusk, the square empties gradually, but the hierarchies remain, invisible yet palpable. Traders tally profits, plan future exchanges, and whisper rumors about who will rise or fall next. Fringe accounts hint that some markets maintained secret registers to track the value of individuals over time, a quiet acknowledgement of human potential reduced to numbers. You shiver at the cold pragmatism, yet can't look away from the patterns of control, negotiation, and status that define this hidden world. As night falls and fires are lit for cooking and warmth, you feel the full weight of what you've observed. These markets are not merely places of exchange. They are mirrors reflecting society's complicity, ambition, and sometimes cruelty. You realize that understanding these social hierarchies is essential to grasping the full story of ancient trade. A world where every person, object, and gesture is part of an intricate dance that has been perfected over centuries. You trudge into a dimly lit alley behind a fragrant spice market, where the scent of cinnamon and musk mingles with something more secretive, forbidden desires. Luxury goods that society outwardly condemned but quietly craved pass through these hidden channels. Perfumes, silks, and aphrodisiacs that could ignite lust or scandal. Historians still argue whether the trade in these items was driven primarily by elite whim or by broader cultural appetites. But from your vantage, it's clear the demand was relentless. You catch a glimpse of a trader arranging small vials of scented oils, each marked with subtle codes, the colors and shapes signaling quality, potency, and origin. Fringe accounts suggest that some perfumes contained rare animal extracts or plant essences, so potent they were believed to alter mood or perception, sometimes used in secret political intrigues. You pause, inhaling the heavy fragrance, and can almost imagine a courtly intrigue unfolding just down these alleyways, where a single drop of oil could influence desire, diplomacy, or betrayal. Alongside scents, silks move with equal discretion. Traders drape rolls over their shoulders, whispering to buyers about their softness and dye richness, while the most prized pieces are tucked into hidden compartments or behind screens. Fringe stories hint that some fabrics were treated with subtle fragrances or powders to enhance their appeal, a multi-sensory manipulation that borders on the theatrical. Historians still debate the prevalence of these practices, but it's clear that aesthetics, sensation, and secrecy intertwine to create a thriving, shadowy economy. You notice a small crowd gathered near a hidden doorway, where the rarest and most scandalous goods are displayed only to trusted clients. Fringe accounts suggest that aphrodisiacs, powders, syrups, and aromatic oils were sometimes smuggled alongside opium or spices, creating a cross-commodity trade designed to maximize profit. The air is thick with anticipation and subtle tension. One wrong glance or gesture could betray a secret connection or ruin a deal. You can almost hear the merchant's whispered advice. Trust the eyes, not the lips, a saying whose meaning only insiders would understand. Even the act of purchasing these items carried risks. Some fringe sources describe elaborate tests of loyalty or discretion, where buyers had to navigate riddles, codes, or even staged misunderstandings before receiving their goods. Historians still argue whether such theatrics were practical security measures or elaborate showmanship, but the psychology behind it fascinates you. You imagine being led through narrow passages, the scent of rare perfumes thickening with each step, heart pounding in equal measure with anticipation and caution. Night falls and the alley takes on a new dimension. Lanterns flicker against walls, revealing intricate tapestries and crates, shadows dancing like silent witnesses. Fringe accounts suggest some merchants employed invisible markings, tiny scratches or patterns, to denote illicit goods, a secret language layered over the items themselves. You feel the thrill and unease of being close to these networks, where commerce, secrecy, and desire converge in ways both mundane and exotic. The human element is never far from your awareness. Some buyers seek prestige, some seek indulgence, and some exploit the desires of others for profit. Fringe sources hint that in certain cities, courtiers or wealthy individuals commission these goods for political leverage, a subtle form of soft power. Historians still debate the degree to which forbidden luxury influenced broader cultural or political decisions, but the connections are unmistakable. You pause at the edge of the alley, inhaling a faint trace of ambergris mixed with crushed petals. It's intoxicating, ephemeral, and secretive, just like the trade itself. You sense that these hidden luxuries, these forbidden desires, are more than commodities. They are instruments of influence, pleasure, and control. And as you continue along the winding streets toward the next hub of commerce, You carry with you the understanding that even the most seemingly frivolous or sensual of goods could ripple through societies in ways as profound as gold, ivory, or human cargo. You trudge along a narrow coastal path where the smell of salt water mingles with tar and smoke, the waves lapping softly against jagged rocks, and suddenly the world becomes more perilous. Pirates, privateers, and bandits. These are the unpredictable forces that thread through every maritime route, waiting to snatch cargo, captives, or coin. Historians still argue whether certain pirates were purely opportunistic or effectively sanctioned by distant governments as privateers, but the threat is immediate and visceral, felt in every creak of timber and whisper of wind. A small brig rocks gently in a hidden cove, its sails furled. You watch figures in dark clothing moving with practiced stealth, transferring crates from ship to shore. Fringe accounts suggest that some pirates operated almost like shadow traders, not merely stealing but redirecting goods into clandestine networks, blurring the lines between theft and commerce. You shiver as a rogue flips a crate marked figs and reveals what lies beneath, imagining how easy it would be to lose days or lives if caught in such schemes. You trudge past a shoreline littered with debris, ropes, crates, and broken amphorae, each telling a story of sudden attacks or narrowly avoided calamity. Fringe sources claim some bandits used early forms of signaling, smoke, mirrors, or strategically placed fires to coordinate raids across miles, a primitive yet astonishingly effective communication system. Historians still debate the sophistication of these signals, but standing there, you can almost see the invisible web of coordination stretching along the coast. In the harbors, privateers operate under the thin guise of legality. Ships carry letters of marque, granting them official permission to seize enemy vessels, yet many use this as cover to attack neutral traders or smuggle contraband. Fringe tales suggest some privateers even maintained secret contracts with rival ports, ensuring a steady flow of stolen goods back into legitimate markets. You notice a merchant in the distance counting coins and nodding to a privateer captain, and the blend of legality and lawlessness seems almost laughable, but deadly real. The human cost is ever present. Captives from intercepted ships are corralled below decks, sometimes receiving minimal rations or a taste of opium to keep them docile. Fringe narratives claim that some pirates maintained crude schools or entertainment to keep the crew efficient and captives subdued, a grim mix of pragmatism and control. Historians still argue whether these practices were common or isolated, but witnessing even a hint of them leaves you unsettled. You trudge along cliffs overlooking the sea, imagining sudden ambushes. A small sloop appears, sails black against the setting sun, and the crack of a crossbow signals the start of chaos. Fringe accounts describe pirates using the natural landscape, coves, reefs, fog, to conceal movements, sometimes engaging in psychological warfare, leaving empty barrels or false signals to mislead rival traders. You feel the tension rise in your chest, the same thrill that would have coursed through every merchant trying to navigate these waters safely. Nightfall brings a deceptive calm. Lanterns flicker along distant decks, and you realize how meticulously these raids were timed. Fringe stories suggest pirates even used trained dolphins or birds to guide ships through reefs or warn of approaching enemies, a fantastical yet plausible form of early reconnaissance. Historians still debate the practicality of such methods, but the creativity and audacity are undeniable. You observe a small village on the shore, where survivors of raids trade information and supplies with cautious glances. The shadow economy thrives here, fueled by the spoils of piracy and banditry. Fringe accounts hint that some villagers acted as double agents, feeding intelligence to both traders and raiders for profit. You pause, noting the delicate balance between survival, loyalty, and opportunism, all set against the vast, unpredictable sea. By dawn, you feel the weight of maritime risk settling into your bones. Pirates, privateers, and bandits are not just anomalies. They are integral components of the trade network, shaping prices, routes, and even the types of goods that reach distant markets. You trudge onward along the coast, feeling the tension of centuries-old rivalries and opportunistic cunning, realizing that at sea, as on land, the dance of commerce is inseparable from danger, intrigue, and the ever-present possibility of betrayal. You trudge along a winding mountain pass where the air smells of pine resin and distant fires, the path narrow and treacherous, as the reality of smuggling networks and hidden alliances presses in around you. Traders here rely on secret pacts, invisible to outsiders, linking villages, bandits, and port officials into a complex web of trust and betrayal. Historians still argue whether these alliances were formalized contracts or informal understandings, but the balance of survival and profit is evident in every footstep. You pause beside a cairn of stones, a subtle marker signaling a hidden cache nearby. Fringe accounts suggest that some traders used these symbols to guide caravans towards safe houses, stashes of goods, or neutral intermediaries, an ancient GPS of sorts. You trace the stones with your fingers, imagining a system so efficient yet so invisible that a casual observer would never guess its purpose. Historians still debate the prevalence of such markings, but their ingenuity is undeniable. Along the pass, small villages act as relay points. Here, merchants exchange information, receive new supplies, and sometimes pay protection fees to local enforcers. Fringe sources claim that some villages operated as semi-autonomous hubs, controlling the flow of illicit goods in exchange for political leverage or immunity. You watch a trader hand over a small pouch of coins to a burly local, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. The scene feels like a chess game played across miles and months, where each move carries consequence. In narrow alleys and shadowed inns, you observe covert negotiations. Fringe accounts describe meetings in which merchants, local rulers, and even bandits convene to coordinate the movement of high-value goods, human cargo, or psychoactive substances. Historians still debate the frequency and formality of these gatherings, but you can see the subtle choreography, gestures, whispers, coded language, and carefully timed exits, all designed to maintain secrecy while maximizing profit. The terrain itself is both obstacle and asset. Steep cliffs, hidden caves, and winding paths allow smuggling routes to avoid patrols and ambushes. Fringe stories claim that some merchants employed guides who memorized hundreds of miles of terrain, teaching apprentices in near mystical fashion. You shiver, imagining the combination of endurance, memory, and cunning required to traverse these mountains while carrying precious and morally complex cargo. Nightfall brings additional layers of subtlety. Lanterns in remote hamlets flicker signals to caravans, while coded knocks on doors confirm safe passage. Fringe accounts even suggest that traders use trained birds or small animals to carry messages over cliffs and rivers, ensuring coordination without human risk. Historians still argue the reliability and sophistication of these methods, but standing there, it feels entirely plausible that such networks were operational and effective. You notice the human toll embedded within this system. Caravans struggle through harsh terrain, captives endure extreme conditions, even merchants face exhaustion and stress. Fringe sources hint at rituals performed at waypoints, offerings, prayers, or symbolic gestures to appease unseen forces and ensure survival. Historians still debate the significance and origin of these rituals, but their persistence suggests a psychological necessity, a small form of control over unpredictable circumstances. Along the ridges, traders communicate with distant camps using visual signals, smoke, flags, and reflective surfaces. Fringe accounts describe these as coded messages indicating convoy movement, enemy presence, or shipment content. You pause, squinting at the horizon, and feel the thrill of being part of a hidden world where even sunlight and shadow can carry meaning. Historians still argue about the sophistication and standardization of these signaling systems, but it's clear that information was as valuable as gold or opium. By dawn, you reach a vantage point overlooking a valley where caravans converge, each contingent moving as part of a vast, invisible network. You sense the delicate balance of alliances, risk management, and intelligence gathering that sustains this shadow economy. Every gesture, every code, and every whispered arrangement is a thread in a tapestry connecting mountains, deserts, ports, and markets, a network whose complexity rivals any empire. You trudge onward, reflecting on the interdependence of geography, secrecy, and trust. Smuggling networks were not mere criminal enterprises. They were lifelines for the trade of luxury goods, psychoactive substances, and enslaved individuals. Fringe anecdotes suggest that some merchants relied entirely on these alliances, bypassing official routes entirely to maximize efficiency and minimize exposure. Historians still debate the morality versus practicality of these networks, but you can feel in your bones the fragile genius that kept them alive. You trudge into a dimly lit city quarter, where narrow streets wind like threads in a tapestry, and the air hums with clandestine energy. Bribes, influence, and hidden officials, this is the invisible machinery that greases the wheels of trade. Gold coins slip silently into waiting hands. Whispers of favors or threats travel faster than caravans, and the laws on the books matter far less than personal connections. Historians still argue whether systemic corruption stabilized trade or merely exploited it, but the patterns are undeniable. You pass a stone archway where a clerk nods subtly to a passing merchant, and you sense the unspoken contract. A toll has been paid, passage insured. Fringe accounts claim that in some cities, officials maintained dual ledgers, one visible, one secret, documenting legitimate transactions while concealing illicit ones. The efficiency of this system is impressive, though morally dubious. You can't help but imagine modern accountants trying to replicate such elegance without blinking an eye. Even minor favors have disproportionate influence. A nod from a harbor official, a wink from a tax collector, a discreet hand gesture during inspection, all can determine whether a shipment of opium or human cargo proceeds unchallenged. Fringe stories hint that some officials accepted symbolic bribes, figures carved from ivory or small vials of rare perfumes, rather than coins, a cultural nod to trust and discretion. Historians still debate the scale of these practices, but their existence is well attested. You notice how merchants cultivate relationships. Invitations to feasts, gifts of exotic spices, and shared secrets all weave networks of loyalty and dependence. Fringe accounts describe cases where entire caravans operated under the protection of sympathetic officials, gaining preferential treatment in return for intelligence or payment. Historians still argue whether these networks created stability or perpetuated inequality, but the immediate advantage to savvy traders is palpable. Night falls, and the city takes on a new rhythm. Fires flicker in alleys, muffled laughter and murmurs drift from taverns, and clandestine deals move behind closed doors. Fringe sources suggest that some officials even acted as brokers themselves, facilitating illicit trade for a share of the profit. You shiver at the moral ambivalence. Law enforcement, entrepreneur, and criminal all rolled into one, functioning seamlessly within the system. You notice the delicate interplay of fear and trust. Merchants must judge which officials are reliable and which may betray them. Fringe anecdotes describe elaborate tests, small trial shipments or coded messages sent to gauge an official's reaction, before entrusting them with high-value cargo. Historians still debate how standardized these tests were, but the underlying logic is simple. In a world of shadows, intelligence and discretion are currency as valuable as gold. Even social rituals reinforce influence. Public festivals, feasts, and religious ceremonies are used strategically to maintain appearances while privately negotiating access to resources or territory. Fringe accounts hint that some officials used coded performances during ceremonies, songs, gestures, or ceremonial objects to signal allegiances or intentions. Historians still argue the significance of these cues, but you feel the elegance and subtlety of influence at work. By dawn, you trudge along a quiet street, reflecting on the power dynamics that make trade possible. Bribes and influence are not ancillary. They are central to the machinery of commerce. Fringe sources suggest that entire supply chains could collapse if even a single official withdrew support, emphasizing the fragile interdependence of politics, wealth, and secrecy. Historians still debate whether this dependency strengthened or destabilized empires, but for the merchants navigating this world, it is survival. You pause at the city gate, inhaling the scent of distant seas and dust, and realize that the hands shaping commerce extend beyond the visible traders. Hidden officials, bribes, and influence operate silently, connecting markets, ports, and caravans in a web of opportunity and peril. And as you continue onward, the lesson is clear. Understanding ancient trade requires seeing not just the goods and the routes, but the unseen power structures that move silently beneath the surface. You trudge through a bustling inland market where the smells of roasted grains and fresh leather mingle with something more pungent, illicit substances and counterfeit goods. Here, the line between legality and deception blurs. Merchants display carefully labeled crates of spices and textiles while concealing opium, hashish, and imitation luxury items beneath. Historians still argue whether counterfeit goods were primarily for profit or to circumvent trade restrictions, but you can feel the ingenuity and risk woven into every transaction. A merchant lifts the corner of a silk roll, revealing a hidden compartment filled with powdered opium. Fringe accounts claim that some counterfeit textiles were dyed with rare pigments or scented with aromatic oils to mimic authenticity, creating a sensory illusion that fooled even experienced buyers. You catch a whiff of crushed saffron and rose, realizing that the deception extends beyond appearance into smell, texture, and weight. Historians still debate whether these practices were widespread or localized, but the creativity is undeniable. The human element is never far. Some trafficked individuals were trained to authenticate goods or act as living proof of quality, a disquieting mixture of performance and coercion. Fringe sources suggest that in certain regions, enslaved artisans were compelled to replicate high-end items, from intricate jewelry to fine glassware, under close supervision. Historians still argue whether this was a form of skill transfer or exploitation, but standing here, you can sense both motives intertwined. Even minor gestures convey hidden meaning. A tilt of a basket, a subtle tap on a crate, or a fleeting glance can indicate the presence of illicit goods. Fringe stories describe apprentices learning these codes as part of initiation into the trade, training their eyes and instincts to detect deception instantly. You feel the thrill of this hidden literacy, recognizing what is concealed from ordinary buyers, the quiet dance of observation and intuition. The geography of deception is intricate. Narrow alleys, hidden chambers, and secret compartments are everywhere, designed to shield illicit goods from both authorities and rival merchants. Fringe accounts suggest that some markets employ decoy goods, creating false paths for inspectors and bandits alike. Historians still debate the sophistication of these countermeasures, but the effect is clear. Commerce here is as much about psychology as it is about product. Night brings further nuance. Lanterns cast shifting shadows across crates, disguising contents and creating a theater of ambiguity. Fringe sources claim that some traders used coded lantern positions to signal availability of rare substances or counterfeit wares, a subtle communication that could reach multiple buyers simultaneously. Historians still argue whether such signaling systems were widespread, but the logic of efficiency and secrecy makes them plausible. The social consequences are equally complex. Trust, reputation, and subtle intimidation maintain the fragile equilibrium. Fringe accounts suggest that even minor exposure of counterfeit or illicit goods could trigger cascading consequences, from fines to violent reprisals. You feel the tension in every interaction, the unspoken agreement that misstep or betrayal carries weight far beyond the transaction itself. By dawn, the market begins to empty, but the lessons linger. Counterfeit goods, hidden substances, and carefully orchestrated deception are not mere curiosities. They are central to how trade functioned in a world where oversight was limited and profit pressures immense. You trudge onward, mindful that each alley, each gesture, each coded signal is part of an intricate ballet of concealment and ingenuity that sustained empires, enriched merchants, and ensnared the unwary. You trudge along a riverbank where the morning mist mingles with the earthy scent of wet reeds and rotting fish, the water reflecting both sunlight and shadows, spies, informants, and shadow deals. Intelligence flows as freely as goods here, with merchants, smugglers, and officials all playing roles in an elaborate game of observation, deception, and negotiation. Historians still argue whether organized espionage shaped trade more than official policies, but the subtle currents of information are undeniable. You notice figures slipping quietly along the water's edge, passing small scrolls, vials, or coins with practiced discretion. Fringe accounts suggest that some informants maintained coded networks stretching across continents, reporting market conditions, ship movements, or the presence of enslaved individuals. You imagine a web of whispers linking distant ports and caravan routes, each secret amplifying the value of the next. Historians still debate how formal or informal these networks were, but their influence on decision-making is palpable. Alongside human observation, coded signals and hidden messages abound. Fringe sources claim that traders used knots in ropes, scratches on poles, or even patterns in stacked goods to convey instructions or warnings. You pause, tracing a faint mark on a crate, feeling the thrill of deciphering a message intended for only one set of eyes. Historians still argue whether these systems were standardized or improvised, but the creativity and ingenuity of these methods are striking. Nightfall brings clandestine meetings along the riverbanks. Shadowy figures negotiate shipments of opium, human cargo, and exotic luxury goods under the cover of darkness. Fringe accounts suggest that some spies posed as traders, officials, or even beggars to relay intelligence back to hidden patrons. Historians still debate the prevalence of such tactics, but the effectiveness of stealth and subtlety in preserving trade advantages is clear. The human stakes are ever present. Informants could secure wealth, status, or survival, but betrayal carried severe consequences. Fringe stories describe elaborate codes of honor among certain spy networks, where leaks were punished not just by confiscation but by social or economic exile. Historians still argue whether these were widespread norms or localized practices, but the tension between loyalty and self-interest is unmistakable. You watch as a merchant discreetly signals a passing boat with a lantern's flicker, conveying critical timing for a shipment. Fringe accounts claim that some riverine spies used trained animals to ferry messages or alert of patrols, a tactic that seems both ingenious and slightly absurd. Historians still debate whether these methods were isolated eccentricities or common practice, but the visual theater of strategy, misdirection, and coordination is mesmerizing. By dawn, you trudge onward along the river, reflecting on the unseen networks that sustain trade. Shadow deals, informants, and espionage are not peripheral. They are essential to moving goods safely, negotiating advantages, and maintaining influence. Fringe anecdotes suggest that entire careers and fortunes rested on the accuracy of intelligence, the subtlety of signals, and the discretion of intermediaries. Historians still debate the morality and efficiency of these practices, but for traders, spies, and officials alike, information is as valuable and as dangerous as any tangible cargo. You trudge past the final bend, realizing that shadow networks form the backbone of ancient commerce, connecting deserts, mountains, ports, and cities through invisible threads. Every gesture, signal, and whispered message has consequences that ripple across continents. And as you continue onward, you carry with you the understanding that the trade of goods, people, and secrets was inseparable from the flow of knowledge itself, a silent, potent force shaping the ancient world. You trudge along a sun-baked desert road where the heat shimmers off the sand, making the horizon ripple like a mirage. Each step presses into the soft grit beneath your boots, and the smell of dry earth, resin, and distant smoke fills your nose. The endless expanse stretches on in every direction, whispering of opportunity, danger, and the fragile balance that ancient trade demanded. Risk, reputation, and the legacy of trade. They are the invisible companions to every caravan, every trader, every shadowy figure whose life intertwined with goods, secrets, and human ambition. Historians still argue whether these networks endured because of human ingenuity or sheer necessity. But standing here, you feel the stakes in your bones. You glance at a distant caravan cresting the dunes, a mixture of humans, camels, and wagons groaning under the weight of gold, silks, spices, and sometimes more morally complicated cargo. Fringe accounts suggest that some caravans carried charms or talismans believed to protect against theft, disease, or misfortune. You notice a small pendant swinging from the saddle of a camel, its shape faintly carved like a tiny sunburst. You wonder whether it was superstition or a calculated psychological tool, a way to inspire confidence, maintain morale, or signal status to those who knew the code. Historians still debate the significance of such talismans, but in a world where danger lurked in every shadow, every small advantage counted. Reputation is currency here, and you can feel it pressing down heavier than the sun overhead. Merchants known for honesty, discretion, or clever negotiation command access to the most lucrative routes and clients. Fringe stories suggest that a single act of betrayal, a misreported shipment, a concealed bribe, a stolen camel, could erase decades of effort, leaving a trader exiled from markets, abandoned by allies, and ostracized from the delicate web of commerce. You watch a young trader bow to an elder, offering a small pouch of silver coins with the respect of someone balancing gratitude and fear. In this moment, every gesture carries meaning, every transaction is a performance, and the rules of social currency are as strict as those of commerce. You notice the immense precision with which caravans are organized. Camels are arranged according to load, temperament, and speed. Drivers are selected for endurance and loyalty, and scouts move ahead and behind, tracking weather, terrain, and potential threats. Fringe accounts describe how some caravan leaders used coded whistles or rhythmic tapping to communicate across the dunes, subtle messages to adjust pace, signal danger, or redirect movement without alerting outsiders. Historians still debate the sophistication of these systems, but the logic is clear. Miscommunication could cost weeks or lives. Risk is never abstract. A sudden sandstorm can sweep away paths and maps, leaving caravans stranded with dwindling water. Bandits lurk in mountain passes and along hidden river crossings, blending into shadows until the moment of attack. Fringe sources suggest that some traders even carried false cargo as decoys, sacks filled with stones or sand, meant to mislead thieves and protect high-value goods. You imagine the careful planning, the mental math of survival, weighing the probability of loss, the cost of deception, and the safety of companions. Historians still argue whether such practices were common or rare, but the concept itself embodies the blend of human foresight and audacity that underpinned these networks. You pause at a small oasis, where the faint rustle of palm leaves and the drip of water create a soothing rhythm. Here, the human element becomes starkly visible. Travelers refill water skins, tend to animals, and exchange information. Captives and apprentices, some free and some bound, move quietly, learning the subtle codes and habits that govern this shadowed world. Fringe accounts claim that enslaved individuals sometimes gained limited leverage by demonstrating indispensable skill, navigating the dunes, identifying water sources, or negotiating local hospitality. Historians still debate whether such opportunities were intended as empowerment or purely utilitarian, but you sense a fragile resilience at work. Night approaches, and the desert transforms. Shadows lengthen, stars ignite the sky, and the road itself seems to hum with history. Lanterns flicker on distant camels, a soft, golden rhythm signaling progress, alignment, and coordination. Fringe sources describe nocturnal navigation strategies, reflective surfaces, rhythmic tapping, and even tiny signal fires, allowing caravans to maintain direction and timing in the absence of modern maps. You notice the meticulous orchestration of movement, the invisible choreography of survival and trade. Historians still argue about the standardization of such techniques, but their practical impact is undeniable. Around you, the conversations are soft but layered. Traders discuss routes, the quality of goods, and rumors of rival caravans or patrols. Fringe stories hint that coded phrases are often embedded in casual speech, an extra layer of protection against eavesdroppers. You hear a seemingly innocuous question about camel fodder and recognize its deeper meaning, the timing of a rival's movement, or a warning of bandit activity ahead. Historians still debate whether these verbal codes were regional, ad hoc, or universally understood, but their subtlety is a testament to human ingenuity. The human stakes remain ever present. You see the tension in faces of young apprentices, the wary glance of a merchant toward a scout, the fatigue in every step of camels weighed down by cargo and heat. Fringe accounts suggest that some leaders maintained small rituals at night, offering symbolic gifts, lighting protective fires, or whispering prayers, to reinforce morale and preserve cohesion. Historians still argue the significance of these rituals, but in a high-risk environment, the psychological impact is tangible. As the night deepens, the desert is no longer empty. It's alive with past and present. You imagine centuries of caravans passing through these dunes, each leaving invisible traces, footprints erased by wind, small markers embedded in stones, or whispered stories carried along trade routes. Fringe sources claim that some traders left coded signs at oases, rocks, or huts, creating a historical breadcrumb trail of commerce and caution. Historians still debate whether these were deliberate records or happenstance, but the idea that trade left invisible marks on the landscape fascinates you. You notice that the very act of movement becomes symbolic. Each careful step, each choice of rest point, and each allocation of cargo carries multiple layers of meaning: survival, economy, morality, and reputation intertwined. Fringe accounts describe how experienced leaders could read terrain, weather, and human behavior almost instinctively, making split-second decisions that ensured the success of the caravan. Historians still argue whether this was learned expertise or innate talent, but you feel the weight of skill required to navigate these complex networks. The first hints of dawn creep across the horizon, painting the desert in soft pinks and golds. You trudge onward, exhausted yet alert, aware that every element—the sun, sand, wind, humans, and goods—is part of an intricate balance. Fringe stories suggest that traders sometimes paused for symbolic reasons, aligning movement with celestial observations or local festivals to ensure good fortune. Historians still debate whether this was superstition or strategic planning, but the intersection of culture, environment, and commerce is undeniable. You trudge onward as the desert sun climbs, heat rippling across the dunes in waves that make the horizon shimmer like liquid gold. Every footstep presses into the sand, leaving temporary traces of your passage, a small reminder that even in this vast expanse, movement is recorded, however fleetingly. Ahead, the caravan snakes along a faint trail, a living line of survival, trade, and careful calculation. Risk hums in the air, unspoken yet omnipresent, as traders balance profit, reputation, and human lives with each passing mile. Historians still debate whether the ancient desert trade relied more on ingenuity or sheer courage, but you can feel the mixture in every bead of sweat on your brow. You watch a merchant pause to adjust a load, a delicate bundle of silks atop a camel's hump, tied with cords so precise that it seems part of an art form. Fringe sources suggest that some traders treated their goods almost ritually, arranging them to signify priority or quality to those in the know. The colors, the knots, the arrangement itself could communicate messages invisible to the untrained eye, an entire semiotic language embedded in cargo. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or confined to elite trade networks, but the subtlety of communication is undeniable. The human element is woven into every moment. Drivers, scouts, apprentices, and even captives play roles in a living system that demands attention, skill, and endurance. Fringe accounts describe apprentices learning desert literacy, reading subtle signs in sand patterns, the behavior of animals, and the placement of distant rocks to anticipate threats. You observe a young guide squinting toward the horizon, nudging a camel with a practiced flick of the rein, and realize that intuition, observation, and history blend into a skill that is almost mystical. Historians still debate how formalized this knowledge was, but its effectiveness is obvious. It keeps caravans alive and moving. As the sun climbs higher, the heat intensifies and fatigue presses on shoulders and limbs. You notice the subtle rituals traders employ to maintain stamina and morale. Small water-sharing ceremonies, whispered encouragements, and even rhythmic chants designed to keep animals moving steadily across endless dunes. Fringe sources suggest that some caravans carried portable musical instruments or rattles, using sound to regulate pace or signal changes in formation. Historians still argue whether this was practical necessity or cultural habit, but the cohesion it creates is palpable. Risk is constant. Dust devils swirl unexpectedly, revealing hidden depressions in the sand, while distant cliffs threaten sudden rockfalls. Bandits and opportunists may strike at any moment, exploiting both geography and human error. Fringe accounts hint at traders using decoy animals, false tracks, or even dummy caravans to mislead potential attackers, a chess game played with real stakes. Historians still debate the prevalence of such countermeasures, but the ingenuity of human problem-solving shines through in these precarious circumstances. You observe the interaction between different classes within the caravan. Senior merchants give instructions in measured tones, while apprentices, drivers, and hired laborers obey with careful attention. Fringe stories suggest that even captives could be assigned limited responsibilities, creating a tenuous but functional hierarchy where each individual's action directly affects the entire caravan's survival. Historians still argue whether this constitutes exploitation, pragmatism, or both, but the efficiency is undeniable. Along the route, the desert itself becomes a participant in trade. Sand dunes shift unpredictably, water holes appear and disappear, and the sun's glare can disorient even the most experienced traveler. Fringe accounts describe caravans using shadow markers, celestial navigation, and animal behavior to anticipate hazards. You pause to observe the patterns of crows circling overhead, imagining that ancient traders would interpret such signs for hidden water sources or potential ambushes. Historians still debate the accuracy of these methods, but the reliance on observation, environment, and instinct underscores the sophistication of desert trade. As dusk approaches, you notice subtle signals between scouts and the main caravan: a flash of reflective metal, a flick of a hand, a discreet whistle. Fringe sources claim that some desert networks use trained animals to relay messages or alert of danger: a small bird carrying a note, a camel nudged in a specific direction. Historians still debate the practicality, but the layered communication network is clearly designed for redundancy and efficiency, a testament to human adaptation. Nightfall blankets the dunes in deep blues and purples, and the stars ignite in silent brilliance. The caravan moves with careful caution, guided by moonlight, lanterns, and memory. Fringe accounts suggest that desert traders maintained secret night rituals to honor survival and maintain cohesion. Small offerings, whispered prayers, or symbolic gestures marking each waypoint. Historians still argue whether these were cultural practices or psychological tools, but their repetition across regions hints at shared understanding of risk, fortune, and human endurance. The social stakes remain. Traders, reputations, alliances, and potential betrayals are ever-present considerations. Fringe anecdotes describe instances where a trusted guide or driver was deliberately tested with a false route or simulated hazard to gauge loyalty. Historians still debate whether these tests were routine or exceptional, but the psychological awareness embedded in these networks is striking. Even small errors or misjudgments could cascade into delayed shipments, lost revenue, or danger to human lives. You watch the interaction between merchants at rest stops. They exchange news, barter, and subtle coded information about competitors, environmental hazards, or potential opportunities. Fringe sources suggest that conversations included hidden signals. The emphasis of a word, the placement of an item on a table, or even a shift in posture could carry meaning inaccessible to outsiders. Historians still argue the sophistication and prevalence of these codes, but the presence of layered communication is undeniable, illustrating a network where every movement conveys both overt and covert messages. As the night deepens, fatigue and relief intermingle. Camels rest, humans huddle near fires, and distant dunes shimmer under the moonlight. Fringe accounts claim that some caravans performed quiet recountings, listing cargo, noting events, and correcting discrepancies before sleep, to prevent errors from propagating across long journeys. Historians still debate the formality of such audits, but the care taken reflects a culture of meticulous attention to detail. Even the smallest elements carry weight. You notice a minor slip of a saddle strap, the slightly off-kilter alignment of a crate, or the faint murmur of discontent among drivers. Fringe sources describe how seemingly trivial details could indicate larger problems: impending desert hazards, rival caravan interference, or the morale of captives. Historians still argue whether such signs were universally understood or idiosyncratic, but attention to detail clearly mattered. By dawn, the desert is bathed in soft, golden light. You trudge alongside the caravan, heart and mind attuned to every nuance. The shifting sands, the murmured conversations, the subtle signals. The human element, the risk, the ingenuity, and the moral ambiguity are intertwined, creating a living tapestry of trade, survival, and ambition. Fringe accounts suggest that traders often left traces of their journey, markers, inscriptions, or small gestures that would guide others or leave their mark on the landscape. Historians still debate the intent, but the notion of leaving invisible footprints of commerce resonates deeply. The sun climbs higher, reflecting off golden sands and glinting metal. You feel the weight of centuries of trade, the network of knowledge, and the fragility of fortune. Every grain of sand, every gesture, and every decision is part of an intricate system, a testament to human ingenuity, resilience, and risk-taking. Fringe stories hint at traders, reliance on celestial alignments for navigation, timing, and even symbolic gestures of luck. Historians still argue the accuracy or symbolism, but the blending of practical and mystical reflects the depth of human strategy. You trudge as the sun reaches its zenith, heat radiating off the sands in waves that blur the horizon, making the distant dunes shimmer like molten gold. Your boots sink slightly into the grainy surface, each step a reminder that in the desert, every motion carries consequence. Risk is woven into the very air, a silent companion to merchants, drivers, and captives alike. Reputation is equally tangible, felt in the careful nods, glances, and gestures exchanged among travelers. Fringe accounts claim that some traders would spend years cultivating a reputation so solid that a single handshake could guarantee safe passage across hostile territories. Historians still argue whether these reputations were based on observable skill or mythic exaggeration, but the impact on trade networks was profound. You notice a small group of camel drivers adjusting their charges, sweat glistening on their brows, muscles straining beneath the sun. Fringe sources describe how drivers sometimes sang soft, rhythmic chants to keep animals moving at a steady pace, a mixture of ritual, efficiency, and morale management. You imagine the low hum of voices carrying across the dunes, a living metronome guiding the movement of humans and beasts alike. Historians still debate whether these songs were purely functional or infused with cultural meaning, but the practicality cannot be denied. The human dimension of this journey is as complex as the terrain itself. Captives huddle under the scant shade of camels or tents, their eyes wary, watching the interactions around them. Fringe accounts hint at instances where enslaved individuals were taught survival skills, how to read the desert, track water, or manage animals, creating a subtle empowerment within an otherwise coerced life. Historians still argue about the prevalence of such practices, but the notion of human adaptation within oppressive systems is striking. You trudge past a small oasis where merchants and guides convene. Conversations are careful, measured, layered with hidden meanings. Fringe sources suggest that seemingly innocuous questions about water availability, camel feed, or local weather could signal rival caravan movements, warnings of potential bandit activity, or even opportunities for secret deals. You pause, listening to the cadence, the emphasis, the glances, and realize that every word carries multiple layers of significance. Historians still debate whether these forms of covert communication were formalized or improvised, but the subtlety is undeniable. Even minor gestures carry weight. A glance, a tilted crate, a flick of a hand can communicate volumes. Fringe anecdotes describe how experienced traders could read these subtle signs to anticipate betrayal, theft, or environmental hazards. Historians still argue whether such observation skills were widely taught or instinctual, but the practical application is clear. Attention to detail was a matter of survival. As the afternoon stretches on, the desert reveals hidden dangers. Sudden sandstorms sweep in without warning, disorienting travelers and animals alike. Fringe accounts claim that some traders used prearranged signals, arrangements of stones, subtle flags, or reflective metal pieces to warn of hazards ahead. Historians still debate whether these measures were standard protocol or ad hoc ingenuity, but their existence highlights the creative problem-solving embedded in ancient trade systems. The social dynamics of the caravan are a delicate balance of authority, loyalty, and negotiation. Senior merchants issue instructions in calm, precise tones, while drivers, guides, and apprentices execute them with a mixture of discipline and cautious judgment. Fringe stories suggest that captives were sometimes entrusted with minor responsibilities, tracking water supplies, observing terrain, or even relaying messages, creating a fragile but functional hierarchy where each person's actions had ripple effects. Historians still argue whether this was pragmatic inclusion or exploitation, but the interplay of human agency and survival is undeniable. Night falls again, painting the desert in deep shades of indigo and violet, with stars sparkling overhead like scattered diamonds. The caravan slows, lanterns flicker, and small fires illuminate the faces of weary travelers. Fringe accounts hint that traders performed subtle rituals, small offerings to desert spirits, whispered prayers, or symbolic arrangements of goods, to maintain morale and safeguard fortune. Historians still debate whether these practices were spiritual, psychological, or a combination, but the effect is clear. Rituals provided structure and reassurance in an unpredictable environment. The desert's silence is punctuated by the occasional low murmur of conversation, the soft shuffle of camels, and the rustle of canvas and leather. Fringe sources describe the use of coded verbal cues during these quiet hours, a way to convey intelligence without alerting outsiders. A question about fodder quality may, in fact, signal that a rival caravan has been spotted, or that a particular path is unsafe. Historians still argue the prevalence of these linguistic codes, but the ingenuity is clear. Language becomes both shield and weapon. You trudge past a series of dunes that seem endless, each shift of sand hiding potential hazards, sinkholes, loose rock, or the tracks of predators. Fringe accounts suggest that some traders deployed decoy caravans or false signals to mislead thieves, rival merchants, or even authorities. Historians still debate whether these were exceptional tactics or common practice, but the strategy reveals a world where perception and reality are tightly interwoven, each influencing outcomes in subtle but powerful ways. The moral complexities of trade are ever present. You notice how captives, apprentices, and even drivers navigate a landscape where ethics, survival, and opportunity collide. Fringe stories describe instances where enslaved individuals negotiated small freedoms or influence within the caravan hierarchy, a precarious agency within a constrained system. Historians still argue whether these arrangements reflect true empowerment or merely survival strategies, but the human ingenuity displayed is undeniable. By dawn, the desert is transformed into a soft palette of gold, rose, and violet, the horizon stretching endlessly. You trudge alongside the caravan, feeling the accumulated weight of centuries of trade, the silent network of routes, secrets, and relationships, and the delicate interplay of risk and reward. Fringe accounts suggest that some merchants left subtle markers, scratches on rocks, arrangements of stones, or faint symbols in sand, as breadcrumbs for future travelers. Historians still debate whether these were deliberate or incidental, but the image of a hidden, living legacy of trade is compelling. The sun rises fully, illuminating the caravan in stark light. You see the careful coordination of humans and beasts, the layered gestures, the coded communications, and the ongoing dance of observation, trust, and subtle deception. Fringe stories hint that experienced traders could predict rival movements, environmental hazards, and even local political shifts with uncanny accuracy, a form of anticipatory intelligence that blends observation, memory, and intuition. Historians still debate the methodology and reliability of such predictions, but their impact on trade outcomes is undeniable. As the day progresses, you reflect on the legacy of these ancient networks. Trade was never just about goods or profit. It was a web of human ingenuity, moral complexity, and calculated risk. Every coin, spice, human life, and gesture contributed to a system that spanned deserts, mountains, rivers, and ports. Fringe sources claim that some merchants documented their travels in subtle ways, leaving behind hints for posterity about routes, alliances, and secrets. Historians still debate the intent and accuracy of these records, but the very idea of a hidden archive of human enterprise is fascinating. The final hours of the day see the caravan approaching a distant city, the first signs of civilization breaking the desert's monotony. You trudge onward, aware that every step carries both relief and tension. Relief at nearing safety, and tension at the knowledge that tomorrow will bring new challenges, new risks, and new decisions. Fringe accounts hint at celebrations or rituals marking the end of long journeys, blending gratitude, superstition, and strategic networking. Historians still argue about the cultural significance of these practices, but their psychological impact is evident. Finally, as the caravan enters the outskirts of the city, you pause to absorb the vastness of the journey. Centuries of trade, risk, and human ingenuity converge here. Deserts crossed, rivers navigated, secrets whispered, and alliances forged. Fringe accounts suggest that some traders maintained silent, symbolic gestures to honor past caravans, marking the continuation of a lineage of knowledge and survival. Historians still debate whether these gestures were meaningful or performative, but the reverence for tradition is palpable. You trudge past the final dunes and into bustling streets, feeling the accumulated weight of human endeavor, risk, and ingenuity. Trade was not simply a transaction of goods. It was an ongoing negotiation with geography, human nature, morality, and ambition. Fringe stories hint that every decision, from the smallest gesture to the largest alliance, echoed across the network, influencing distant markets, political decisions, and human lives. Historians still argue about the relative importance of individual agency versus structural forces, but the interplay is undeniable. And as the sun dips low, casting long shadows across the city, you realize the profound lesson. Ancient trade, with all its risks, human cunning, and hidden networks, was a living, breathing system. Every route, signal, gesture, and secret contributed to a complex, fragile, yet astonishingly resilient web, a testament to human ingenuity, ambition, and the relentless drive to connect, survive, and thrive. You trudge along the final stretch of the desert road as the city walls rise ahead, sun-scorched and gilded by the late afternoon light. Every footstep carries both relief and reflection. Relief that the caravan has survived sandstorms, bandits, and the relentless heat, and reflection on the human ingenuity, risk, and subtle negotiation that allowed survival across centuries of ancient trade. Fringe accounts claim that some merchants marked the end of a journey with small symbolic gestures, arranging stones at the oasis, leaving a token for the next caravan, or silently acknowledging those who did not survive. Historians still debate whether these acts were ritualistic, practical, or a form of silent storytelling, but their emotional weight resonates across time. You notice the final organization of the caravan, each camel unloaded, each crate checked, every person accounted for. Fringe sources suggest that this final inventory was sometimes conducted with coded gestures rather than spoken words, preserving secrecy from both authorities and opportunists. Historians still argue the standardization of these protocols, but the meticulousness is evident. You can almost feel the centuries of accumulated wisdom embedded in each routine. Lessons learned from past mishaps, innovations, betrayals, and triumphs. The city beyond the gates hums with life. Merchants, laborers, travelers, and officials moving in intricate patterns. A continuation of the networks you have been following across deserts, rivers, and mountains. Fringe accounts hint that some traders deliberately timed arrivals to coincide with political events, local festivals, or shifts in market demand. A subtle interplay of strategy and luck. Historians still debate the sophistication of these planning methods, but the foresight required is clear. As you trudge through the bustling streets, you sense the interplay of risk and reward, loyalty and betrayal, ingenuity and survival. Each street, alley, and marketplace carries echoes of the caravans that passed through before, leaving behind invisible traces of commerce, negotiation, and human ambition. Fringe sources suggest that some traders left subtle markers, etched symbols, arranged stones, or even lingering scents of incense, to guide or warn future travelers. Historians still debate the purpose and prevalence of these practices, but their existence underscores the human desire to communicate across time and space. Finally, you pause at the city gates as night begins to fall, stars faintly appearing above the walls. The journey is over, but its lessons are indelible. Ancient trade was never merely about goods or money. It was a living network of human ingenuity, moral ambiguity, strategy, and endurance. Every gesture, signal, and decision carried weight. Fringe anecdotes suggest that some traders even whispered small stories of previous journeys to the next generation, creating a continuum of knowledge and memory that extended beyond individual lifetimes. Historians still argue how much of this was intentional preservation versus happenstance, but the effect is clear: a web of legacy stretching across centuries and continents. You trudge the final few steps into the heart of the city, feeling the accumulated weight of experience, human resilience, and creativity. Trade, with all its hidden deals, espionage, risk, and moral complexity, was a grand theater in which humans acted simultaneously as performers, strategists, and survivors. Fringe accounts describe the careful observation of rival traders, the secretive movements of informants, and the subtle influence of reputation as forces as tangible as gold, silk, or spice. Historians still debate the relative influence of these factors, but witnessing them in thought feels vivid, almost alive. And as the evening settles, the streets hum with possibility and memory, the caravan dispersing into workshops, markets, and homes. You realize that the desert, the rivers, the mountains, and the alleys of far-flung cities were all stages for an extraordinary human drama, a network of connection, ingenuity, and survival that shaped history. Every risk, every hidden signal, every moral compromise, and every act of courage contributed to a story still whispering across time. The wind brushes across your face, carrying scents of dust, incense, and spices, a quiet reminder that trade was, and always has been, a living system, complex, fragile, ingenious, and profoundly human. You trudge onward, leaving the city behind, carrying with you a deeper understanding of the ancient world's shadowed networks, its perils, and its brilliance. And now, as night deepens and the stars brighten, the pulse of history slows, inviting you to pause, breathe, and reflect. The night stretches long and quiet now, and you feel the weight of centuries gently lift from your shoulders. The heat of deserts, the bustle of markets, and the rhythm of caravans fade into memory, replaced by the soft hum of your own breathing. You imagine the quiet sweep of dunes, the shimmer of river crossings under moonlight, and the flicker of lanterns along distant trade routes, each a whisper of human ambition, ingenuity, and survival. The shadows of traders, captives, and guides seem to dissolve into the calm night air, leaving only echoes of resilience and subtle strategy. You think of every hidden signal, secret gesture, and coded word you've witnessed on this journey, realizing that these networks of commerce were as much about human ingenuity as they were about goods. The whispers of spies, the care of camel drivers, the cautious gestures of merchants, all carry a soft rhythm that continues beyond the immediacy of risk and profit. Fringe stories of talismans, decoy caravans, and quiet rituals now feel less like secrets and more like threads weaving together centuries of human creativity and adaptation. Historians still debate the significance of many of these practices, but in this quiet, they resonate like a gentle pulse of continuity. As your eyelids grow heavy, the desert winds, the rivers, and the bustling marketplaces slowly fade from your mind. You are left with a sense of awe and calm, the intricate dance of human endeavor softened into gentle patterns of thought. Every risk taken, every secret kept, and every gesture made echoes softly into history, inviting you to drift into sleep with a deeper understanding of the past. Now the world is still. You breathe in, exhale slowly, and let the stories of trade, ingenuity, and human resilience lull you into a quiet, reflective rest. Sweet dreams.